After the release of Pokémon Dark Edition and Pokémon SWAT, many of you asked us to return to this world. But we didn't want to rush back into it without coming up with an idea that we liked. After a lot of research and discussion, we came up with the idea for a new short film in this universe. Welcome to Pokémon Dark Edition 3. For those who haven't seen the movie, the rest of this making of spoils a lot. It all started with a Pokédex entry for a Pokémon we liked on the team, Cubone. Wears the skull of its deceased mother. The idea of using Cubone was strengthened by a fan theory that we found very interesting. Cubone was actually the baby of a Kangaskhan. With that in mind, we wanted to show the birth of a Cubone. So we had to imagine the death of its mother and the circumstances surrounding it. A new Pokédex entry, Drowzee, put us on the right track. Puts enemies to sleep, then eats their dreams. Occasionally gets sick from eating bad dreams. What if Drowzee only ate nightmares to relieve the human mind of its worries and stress? This would act like a drug to humans, reminiscent of the opium den, where people went to relax without understanding the addiction that followed. From these two ideas, we had the setup. The idea behind Dark Edition is to connect Pokémon to our human society, as if they were an integral part of our world. Since the project was self-financed and created in our spare time, we also had to think through the story to avoid too many technical complications. Kangaskhan would, in spite of itself, be used as a bouncer in a Drowzee's den run by Team Rocket, who would exploit Drowzees to make them eat nightmares, even if it meant making them sick. A series of events involving Sabrina and Hypno would eventually lead to Kangaskhan's death and the birth of Cubone. The Dark Edition universe is meant to be a realistic version of Pokémon. That's why we always try to get as close as possible to existing animals when thinking about the design of various Pokémon we use. For Kangaskhan, as the name suggests, the kangaroo was the first research base. But its 2D design and role in the story called for a more imposing shape, such as a bear. These two animals were our main references, while trying not to stray too far from the original design. So we added these various plates that resemble the shell of an armadillo. You may also have noticed that he's got a tattoo on his ear, like a cattle ID. It just goes to show how unimportant this is to Team Rocket. For Drowzee, the main animal is a tapir. We just had to make him bipedal. The design was pretty straightforward, but the animation was not. We needed to show them exhausted, disoriented. If they absorb too many nightmares, they end up living in them and never seem to get out. Hypno is a proboscis monkey with a weird nose and a white ruff. As with Drowzee, we had to make him bipedal. But most important was his stoic, hypnotic appearance. His pendulum played a very important role in the movie. By the way, did you notice the pendulum Easter egg? It's based on a Japanese 5-yen coin, and the various engravings are reminiscent of the shape of the Pokeball. Sabrina, champion of the Psy Pokemon, was ideally suited to be Hypno's companion and rescue the poor Drowzees from Team Rocket. However, she remains cold-hearted and convinced of her vision, even if it means sacrificing Kangaskhan. As for her design, we wanted to keep the game's iconic red-burgundy color scheme, while giving her a more realistic look. That's why we chose a red dress with black leggings and chunky red boots. We would have liked to keep the iconic long hair, but technically, that would have been too complicated and time-consuming for a self-funded project. The Team Rocket grunt is based on the one in the game, but, like Sabrina, we wanted to give it a more modern and realistic twist. The bomber jacket and cargo pants seemed like the right idea to illustrate a grunt dealing with a place as dark as the environment in which the movie takes place. The environment had to serve two functions. The first was to create a dark, oppressive atmosphere that foreshadowed the end of the story. The second was to reflect a kind of cozy place where people want to go to relax. We looked at photos of old opium dens, as well as movies like Parasite for the basement scene, or Once Upon a Time in America for the opium scenes. You can also find some small details to ground the world of Dark Edition, especially in the posters, where you can see the Pokemon League, a mention of Red, and street fights. Cubone was the most difficult to design. He had to look like the mother while still maintaining the look of a Cubone. But he also had to be cute to make his mother's death emotional. Baby kangaroos were our main references, but we still made him a little rounder to match Kangaskhan's build and physique. Have you noticed Ricky? He was the character in our first Pokemon trailer. We wanted to tie him in with that short film. He's still investigating his daughter's disappearance, and eventually discovers Cubone in its final form in Team Rocket's lair. In order to save time, we used motion capture for a large part of the movie. However, some shots that were extremely important and technically difficult to capture in motion capture were animated by hand. This also allowed us to be a little more ambitious with the emotions we wanted to convey, even if it meant lengthening certain shots to allow the animation to take its time. Animating a Pokemon realistically is quite a challenge, and a lot depends on little details like ears or the eyebrows. The lighting and mood of the scene, like the environment, had to reinforce the sense of oppression and gloom. Yellowish industrial neon and a slightly greenish atmosphere played this role. Parasite was a great influence, and manages to play on the absurdity of the situation and the unhealthiness of the place. As for the Drowzee's workplace, it's more orange-red to recall the Oriental or Asian lanterns that used to adorn this kind of place. Carpets and linens reinforce this impression, while the decor is a bit haphazard with random decorations hung on dirty concrete walls. The nightmare sequence went through several iterations of varying lengths, but we had to choose efficiency and find a simple compromise. This sequence mirrors Hypno's attack on Kangaskhan, which, after putting him to sleep, triggers the Dream Eater attack, leaving only a series of epileptic, frightening images in Kangaskhan's mind. So we use static characters with very specific facial expressions and red lighting to effectively show the sinister, nightmarish aspect. This sequence also features the ear tattoo of a soporific and the subliminal image of another Pokemon. Did you notice who it was? Finally, the sound design helps the whole thing find its unhealthy dimension, illustrating Kangaskhan's death in a simple way. The sound design was the final, essential layer that brought the film to life. Crafting the sounds for the Pokemon was particularly challenging. Everything was built around the clock ticks, which served as the backbone of the audio architecture. Initially emitted from a clock on a table beside the bouncer, these ticks transitioned to Hypno's coin, creating an unsettling rhythm. When Kangaskhan falls asleep early in the film, the ticks abruptly stop, hinting that the sound was perhaps only in her mind. This motif builds tension further as Hypno invades Kangaskhan's psyche. Synchronized clock ticks and heartbeats emphasize his growing control. The emotional climax comes at the end of the nightmare, when the final sound before Kangaskhan's brutal death is her baby's yell, her last, heartbreaking thought as she fades away. For the music, we contacted Jesse Haugen, who scored the short film. The whole idea behind the music was to match the pendulum, which is matched to a second. You can find a very detailed making of the music on his YouTube channel, which you'll find in the description below. You can find out all about his creative process and all the little Easter eggs that have crept into the soundtrack. We've also set up a Patreon page if you like the movie, or want to learn more about the process creatively and technically. A short movie like this is quite expensive, and we'd like to make another one. That's why we need your help. If you want to, and if you can, please become one of our Patreons.